So I just want to show you, I get these slides all the time, and they involve the word food, which I know is very important to you guys. So this is on Wednesday from 4:30 to 6 in the Chache building, 1090. Apparently there's a little Q&A session talking about computer science as a major. I'm going to talk about this probably on the last day of classes, April 16th. I'm going to talk about doing a major in computer science and future things that you guys can do to become better programmers. Because in today's world, it's very, very important to learn programming. Every time I talk to someone who's in definitely any field, no matter what field, they need programming to do their work. For example, physicists and biologists, they always come to me and say, yeah, I know a little bit of MATLAB or R to do my studies. You just need programming. Okay. But I won't talk about that till the last class. I do want to remind you from 3 to 5, we're going to have midterm viewings. That's in the McConnell building, room 321. You guys can come in and see the midterms and see your answers on that. So again, today from 3 to 5. Okay, so what are we going to talk about? I'm just going to recap what we were talking about before with the overloading and everything. I think I'm going to leave the apartment example until the end. I'm actually going to skip over to do data structures, and then we'll do the apartment example at the end of class. So we're going to talk about data structures, dynamic arrays, so creating your own array that can change size. Then I'll show you guys ArrayList, which is a built-in way of having a dynamic array. It's really nice to use, so I want to show that to you guys, and it's definitely on the last assignment. And then if we can, we'll talk about cat spas, because that's obviously very important. Okay, so just to recap, we talked about overloading a little bit, which is where we might want to have two different methods in the same class, and they have the same name, and the rule is they have to have different parameters. So for example, why would you want this? You might want this depending on the method's types to change the algorithm, or where we usually use it is for different constructors. So I showed you this before. Here we have two add methods. The first add method adds two integers. The second add method adds two doubles. Java figures out which version to call based on the types. So here are two integers, so Java will call the int version. Here are two doubles, so Java will call the double version. And as I said, Java figures out the types, which one it wants to call. Java is a little bit lazy. It prefers not to do the conversion if it can. So if it can find a version if it can find a version of the add method that wants two ints, then it will call the int version. So this works because these parameters are different types. Show you an example where it doesn't work. Here I'm trying to create two multiply methods. They both have the same parameters, int x and int y. The name change doesn't matter. One returns an int, one returns a double. It doesn't matter. What matters is, are the names of the methods the same, and can you tell the parameters apart? Here we have two methods with the same parameters. Java can't tell them apart, so Java will complain, and it will either say you've already defined the method, or when you write the method call, it will complain about that and say I don't know which version of the method to call. So again, with overloading methods, you have to make sure that your parameters are different in order for Java to accept that. Let's see the most common way of doing overloading. We usually overload the constructor in a class. So here we're in the painting class, where each painting has an artist and a value. Here we have one constructor that takes the artist and the value, and another constructor that only takes the value. So how can you call this? Here's one constructor call with the name and the value, and here is a constructor call with just the value. So Java figures it out. It goes, okay, this one has a string and a double. This one has a double. There's two totally different constructors. Everything's fine. Okay. Any questions about that? All right. We also talked about the toString method, super useful. So it must be public string toString, public string toString. It returns a string. Usually we construct it so that it has all of the relevant details of an instance. So for example, here we're creating a Starry Night painting. Here we're creating a sunset painting. When we print them out, before we add the toString method to the class, Java is just going to give us the name of the class and then the address, which isn't super useful. After we add that toString method, we can see prints out the artist and the value. So this is much better for debugging. So what happens is that when you try to print out an instance of a class, here we're doing system.out.println Starry Night. So we're trying to print out an instance of the class. Java will automatically call the toString method and then print that out. So if you haven't created your own version, Java will print out the default. Let me say this: the default version of the toString method just prints out the class name and the address. You need to write your own version to make it more useful. So again, I'm printing out the artist and the value, so then I can do some good debugging and actually have some useful details here. So it needs to be public string toString as the method header. Questions about that? Okay. Then I also showed placing paintings in an array. So it's very similar to putting strings in an array. Here we have an array of paintings. I say that there are 3 spots. I use my arrays.toString method on here, and there are 3 null elements. Again, paintings are reference types, so it's null. The default value is null. Here I'm creating a new painting and putting it in the 2nd spot in my painting array. Then when I use my arrays.toString method, it will try to print every value, every element inside that array. The first one and the last one are null. And then it tries to print out the second painting, the second element. And that's my instance. That uses the toString method to print out the details. So once you define the toString method on a class, it becomes much easier to print instances of that class and to print out arrays of that class. So I encourage you to spend time on your toString method to make it have a more pretty value so that it's easier to debug. Okay. What we also did with paintings and arrays was just to show you an example of iterating through and doing something useful with paintings and arrays. I create 3 paintings. I place them in my array using the braces syntax. So painting array collection. I pass that collection to the max value method. That max value method, it assumes the first one is the best painting of my collection. Because I own so many paintings, I need a collection of them. I iterate through all the spots in my array. If at position I, if that painting has a value that's greater than the value of what I have as my best painting, then we set the best painting to be that one. And then at the end, we return the best painting. So this is just a very common max value method where we're looping through an array and we're accessing attributes. We could also call methods on each painting in that array, and we're storing the best painting. We're storing the painting with the highest value in that array, and then we return it, and then we can print out its value, print out its name, whatever. So this is all to show you that storing reference types in an array, it's very similar to storing strings in an array, and that's because strings are reference types. It's all the same thing. It's all very consistent. Okay, questions about this? Yep?
How for the painting sunset is not giving an error since you're not initializing the artist of the painting?
We did when we had, let me go back. Here, we are actually doing that. And again, if we did not set the value of the artist, it would just be null. So that's okay, it has a value, you just need to check for that. Good question. Okay, any other questions? All right. I'm going to skip the apartment example for right now, and I would like to go to dynamic arrays, because I'd like to get through that first. So we'll skip to page 35, dynamic arrays, and let's talk about why we want some dynamic arrays. And we want dynamic arrays because it's very annoying to have these arrays have a fixed size. So let's start working on a dynamic array. And for right now, we'll just have a dynamic array that stores integers. And the important thing is that we'll have an array that automatically resizes as we add elements. So in our array class, we'll have two attributes. We'll have the integer array itself, and we're going to store the size of that array, how many elements are in that array. So here's the top of the class, public class dynamic int array. We're going to store an integer array inside our class, and we're going to store the number of elements in that array. So we want to have this dynamic array because we want it to resize for us, and it's also great practice for doing array manipulations. What we can do with a dynamic array, what's the idea to create it? What we can do is we can create that inner array with a guess for the size, and then keep track of how many elements we've been inserting. And then, if the array is full, we create a new, larger array, and then we copy all the elements over. And then we set that array to be the larger array. Okay. So let's start writing code. Class dynamic array. Dynamic array example. Okay. So we'll have our dynamic array, and within a dynamic array, we want there to be an inner int array, and we'll store the number of elements we've placed in that array. Actually, let's do the constructor. So I want to show this just to show some overloading constructors and some array manipulation. We'll have two constructors. One, if you have no idea how large you want your array to be, and we'll have another constructor if you have a guess to how many elements you want in your dynamic array. Can someone tell me, do I need to do num elements is equal to 0? Who says I do need to do that? Who says I don't need to do that? Why don't I need to do it?
Because it's in a class.
Because it's, I would say, because it's an attribute. Because it's an attribute, it will get a default value. The default value of integers and doubles is 0, so I don't need to do this. I'm just going to do this for clarity. It makes things easier to read. It's easier to understand.
For that reason, would you do that? If this were an assignment, would we want to do that for clarity also?
Yep, I would say that you would want to do that. Okay. So let's create one of our dynamic arrays. let's just say it's A. Let's say, you know what? I think this is going to store five integers. And then we'll try to print it out. Can anyone tell me what this will print out right now? I haven't yet made a toString method in here. So what's the default thing that Java prints out? It'll be the useless thing. It'll just be the class name and then the address. So I don't want that. I want something much more useful. So then I need to do a toString method. Let's not be too fancy here. Let's just do r at I plus that. Return s plus the other bracket. Okay, so here's my toString method. Now we actually have a toString method. Now we can actually print out our elements inside our inner array here, the integer array. We can just loop through and return a string that has all of the elements inside of it. So now we can, it's that quick to create an instance of our dynamic array, to give it a size that we think it might be. Okay, we might have 5 or more elements in here, and then to print it out. So that's why I really like it in this part of the course, is because I can quickly create something, dynamic array, it has some attributes, has different ways of constructing it, and it has a way to print it out in a few lines of code. It's really nice. Okay. So what we want to do, the primary reason we want to have this dynamic array is that we want our user to be able to add things to this dynamic array. And then once we have more than 5 elements, we just want to resize the array so that the user doesn't have to worry about this. So let's create our add method. Let's have int x. And for right now, I'm going to add to this, but in our add method, we'll just take the number of elements, we'll index into our array. So if you think about this, num element starts at 0. So the first position in the array, we'll place our x, and then we'll add 1 to the number of elements. So I can just do a.add 47. And then print that out. So we had our array of 5 spots, and now I'm adding 47, and it gets placed into the first spot of the array. And you can see that right here, I have my toString method. It's going through my entire int array. It's not quite. It's not. Let me see this. It's not showing the user a nice array. It's showing, okay, there are 5 empty spots. The user shouldn't have to care about how many empty spots there are. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create another method. This will be full toString. Actually, let's call this debug toString, and then the toString method, we're going to change that so it only goes up to the number of elements. So again, I copy and pasted. So we have one toString method, debug toString. This won't be automatically called. This is so we can look at, okay, where are our numbers? Where are all the empty spots? And we're changing our toString method to just go up to the number of elements. So let's see what this looks like. Now you can see we actually have something that's not too bad. It's kind of user-friendly. If we try to print out an empty dynamic array, it's just going to give us 2 braces. Here we're adding 47, and we print it out. It gives 47, just 47 within the 2 braces. So let me just recap what we did. We have a dynamic array. Inside, it stores an integer array. It keeps track of how many elements are in that array. We need to update that, keep track of that ourselves. We have 2 ways of creating a dynamic array. One where we just assume it's a default value of default size of 10. The other one where we can give it an initial guess. We have so far an add method. It's not quite complete, where we place that that new value into our inner array and we update the number of elements. We have a debug toString method that will print out every element inside that array just for us to debug it. We have a nice toString method that only iterates up to the number of elements. Okay, so questions about this? Yep?
How do we call the debug toString?
You would do this. It's a method, so you just do debug toString. And you can see here's the empty one, here's one with the 47 inside, and here's what the debug toString method returns. So you can see, okay, there are 5 spots in there, and you as a programmer know what's going on. Okay. So what I want to do, any questions before we move on? Yep.
So is the array actually of length 5, and we're just printing out different lengths of that array, or is it?
It's actually of length 5,
Okay.
and then you're just printing out the first spot in it.
Yeah.
That's why you kind of need two string methods, one for something that's user-friendly, and one to show you as a programmer, okay, how long is this? You know, what's inside
So
there.
we're not actually changing the length of the array, it's just appearing different.
Yeah, we're just changing in our toString method what our I iterates up to.
Okay.
Okay. Question?
Well, it's linked to that in the sense that if you were to do, I don't know, I'm trying to figure out how, like, if you were to do enough num elements such that there would be 6,
Yep.
would you be able to do that and it would expand the array size?
Well, if I do, what is that? If I do 7, if I call the add method 7 times, what's going to happen?
You're going to start back at the beginning of the array.
Not quite. This num elements will go up to 7, and then if I've created an array that's only 5 elements long, and I try to access something that's past the end of the array.
It'll give you like array gone over the out of bounds.
Yep. Array index out of bounds exception. So it's saying 5 when I'm trying to access it, it doesn't work. Okay. So here's the core problem. Here's the thing that we really want to fix. So what I want to do is I want to check. Is there a number of elements that we have stored? Is that longer or is equal to our array length? If so, I'm going to call resize. So we're going to add a new method here. And we're going to add the resize method. It's not useful to call it from outside the class, so we're just going to make it private. It will be void, doesn't need to return anything, resize. And what we're going to do is we have our inner array. We're going to double the length of it. We're going to copy the elements in, and then we're going to say that that new array is the new inner array. So let's first create our new array. Move this over. Okay. So here we're creating a new array, and we're saying it's twice the size of our current array. We'll have a for loop to go through. And what I want to do is I want to copy each element from the current array to the new array. How can I do that? What do I want to write inside here? I'm iterating I from 0 to the length of my current array. How can I copy each element from my current array over to my new array? Anyone?
The new array references I.
Yep.
And equals array of I.
Yep. So right there, we're just taking the value from our current array, and we're just placing it into our new array. So again, creating a new array of double the length. Oops, sorry. I need new int array. I copy all the elements over. And then here's the trick. Is that you update the inner array. Once you've created your new array and you've copied all your elements in, you say, okay, you want that array, you want it to point to the new one. So it's awkward to say in English. Let me just write some comments. Create the new array. Copy values from old to new. And then set the new array as the current array. So creating the new one, copying the values over, set our new array as our current array, and then let's see if this worked. It did. That looks pretty good. Here I have 7 elements. So I added 7 elements. What happened was as soon as the number of elements, as soon as that was greater than or equal to the array.length, I'm calling this resize method. This resize method creates the new array, copies them, and then sets the new one to be the current one. And then we can just keep on adding things into our array. So quite a lot of stuff is going on here. If you count the number of elements in here, there should be 10 spots in our new array after it has been resized. We started with 5. As soon as we ran out of room, we doubled the length, so now it's 10. And excuse me. And to double the length, we had to do this trick. We can't directly change the length of an array. So what we need to do is we need to create a new array of a different size and then copy all the values in. Here we're creating a new array, copying all the values in, and then we're setting this .r to be the new r. So we're setting the new array as the current array. Okay. Lots of stuff going on here. Any questions?
So the R at the top there under public dynamic array size, actually, can you go higher than that?
Yep.
So private int r, that
Yep.
basically that goes on up until the resize is in effect.
Well, this is just an attribute. It's an attribute that stores an address.
So the address it stores is a certain thing up until the resize comes into effect. And
Yeah.
as soon as it comes into effect, a new address is sort of being
Yeah.
referred to from that point on.
Every time that there is a new, every time here, it's assigned a new address. So here it points to an integer array of 10 spots. Here it points to an integer array of size spots, whatever that is. Looking at resize, here the new array variable points to an integer array of that length. And here we're copying the address from the new array variable. We're assigning that to the R attribute. So we're copying that value over to there. So then after this method, we can just keep placing things into there. And we've been in another method. That address has been changed to something else. So now we're dealing with a new list.
And then if you basically create a new dynamic array in the other class,
Yep.
like dynamic array B,
Yep.
then you'd go back to the original array size.
That dynamic array would be pointing to its own lists and stuff.
Which would start with whatever new int array size you declared.
Yeah, it'd create new lists of 10 or whatever size, and they're totally different. Okay. Questions about this one? The one in the back? Yeah.
Is the helper method automatically called on A because it was called from another non-static method?
You're asking about the resize.
Yeah. Is it called on A?
Yeah. You can write resize, or you can write this dot resize. It's the same thing.
Okay.
When you write a method call, Java will look. Okay, can I call a method inside my own class? It can. It's a non-static method. Everything works fine. So you can write just resize, or you can write this dot resize. I apologize. I should probably write this dot just to be more explicit. There was another question. Yep.
If you want to increase the length by, for example, 12,
Yep.
would the resize method be called twice? If it does times 2, so could you actually 10, which wouldn't be enough?
So if I restate what you said, changing the size of our new array, right? Yeah, you can make it 12. You can make it anything as long as it's greater than what it is. For example, if I wanted to, I can make this times 1.1 and then convert it back to an integer. So then I'm only adding 10% more. But then I'm going to do a lot of resizes.
But if this number is not enough, would it be called twice? Because here we have a size of 5.
Yep.
So we did it twice.
Oh, okay. I see what you're saying.
Then you'd end up with 20.
Yeah. Let's add some debugging stuff. So when the resize method is called, it will just do some printing. Add a ton. So here resize got called 3 times. So now you can see it put all these values in here. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff going on here, but hopefully you can see that you can actually create something pretty quick, and now you have a dynamic array that can change size. It's super, super useful. Okay, any questions before I go back to the slides? These are great questions. All right. So let's just skip this. That's what I showed you. All right. And what I want to do is I want to discuss a few of the other public methods we need. So we might have something like public int get at index int I that returns the element at a particular index. We might have replace at index which replaces the element at an index, though this is wrong. It should take int I and int x, so it can put x at that particular index. We could have a getter method, size, to return the number of elements in that array. We can have a searching method in our dynamic array to search that inner array to tell the user whether that inner array contains x or not. That's very useful. A tricky one is to do remove at index int I, so to remove an element at a particular index. And what you need to do there is you need to write a helper method private void shift over, because if I have my int array and I want to delete something in the middle, I need to shift over everything from that position to the end of the array. I need to shift that over by 1. So really, that's just a for loop, just to copy everything over to the previous position. But you do need that helper method. So I'm going to be posting this code. I'll post the code for all these methods on my courses, but I leave it as an exercise to you. It's great practice to practice your practice dealing with arrays and practice creating classes and non-static methods. Okay. Because what I do want to talk about, array lists, because array lists are great. They're fantastic. And it's a version, it's pretty much the built-in data structure that's a dynamic array. So I wanted to show you dynamic array just so you get a feeling of what's going on behind the scenes with an array list, and so that you get an appreciation for how much, for the annoyances that Java hides from you. So let me say that another way. Now you know how to create a class that does useful things. It hides the annoying parts of dealing with arrays and resizing arrays. Now we're going to talk to you about array lists that give you all of those methods. Okay. And as an added bonus, we just did a dynamic array for integer types. But with an array list can hold any reference type, which is super, super useful. But I'm going to talk about that next week. Okay. So just to discuss array lists, I'm going to show you code in a second. Array lists, they don't have a fixed size. You can add things to them and remove things to them, and that changes their length. They can store any reference type. And you have methods to add, delete, and check if something exists. So let's create an array list that stores strings. So it's a little bit more complicated than other things we've seen. Excuse me. Again, we have a variable name. It's of type array list. And what's special is that when we're dealing with array lists, you need to tell Java what this array list will store, what type it stores. So here, we're creating an array list that stores strings. And it's slightly different from arrays, stuff like that. We put the type that the array list stores. We do it using angle brackets, which are right next to the question mark on my English keyboard. I have no idea where they are in the French keyboard. If you want to create this new array list, it's just new array list. Again, you need to put the type and then bracket bracket. So this is how to create an array list that stores strings. And once you create it, you can start calling methods on it. So we have the size method for array lists. So if you call list.size, you'll get how many elements are stored in that array list. So right now, if I've just created something, it has 0 elements. Array lists are very nice. You can see I want to show you the comparison between dynamic array and an array list. Behind the scenes, array lists are doing something pretty much like dynamic arrays, but we do this. We That's why object orientation is useful, because it hides the details from you. Here we have our array list storing strings list. The size is 0. We call .add. We pass it 2 strings. And then when we check our list again, it has a size of 2. So as you expect, you can add things to this array list. We also have a very nice toString method. It's pretty much the same thing I just showed you as a dynamic array. It just prints out the elements inside the array list. Internally, it just calls toString on each of the elements it stores. We can also ask if that list is empty or not. That's sometimes useful. And just to show you some more methods, here, string s is list.get 0. So this is the way you index into an array list. So if I want to get the first element in an array list, it's list.get 0. That will return the first element. We can also do searching. So we can see, does our list contain the word hello? And in this case, it does. Okay. I think I'm just going to show you a few more methods, and then I'll actually use these in some code. Just to give you a little sample of what an array list can do and just how useful and nice to use it is. So here you can also remove an element at a particular index with the remove method. So this removes the first element in the list. So we started with 2, now we only have 1 element in there. And then if we want to remove all the elements in the list, I don't know why that's useful, but it's there if you want to. You can clear the list, and that wipes out all the elements inside. So just to have them all here, this will be, the documentation for this will be on the final. I don't expect you to remember this. We'll have something pretty much exactly like the slide, so don't worry about copying it down. But I want to show you all some of the methods that you can use with an array list. You can add, you can get, you can check if something is empty, index of, see what the index of is, of a particular element, get the size, and see if it's contained, true or false. So I also want to show this because as good practice would be take that dynamic array I just showed you and implement all of these methods on the dynamic array. So make sure you know, okay, how can I get the index of a particular int inside my dynamic array? How can I return true or false if that element is in there? How can I return true or false if that is empty or not? That's great, great practice. Okay. 2 more methods. You can add something at a particular index. That's a little bit harder to do if you're using your dynamic array. Or we can also set at a particular index as well. And in the documentation, it does say that you can get an array index out of bounds exception. So that's also another thing that you might want to put inside your dynamic array, is to warn the user and to throw exceptions if they're trying to do something, if they're trying to access an index that isn't inside your integer array. So I show all this so that you have inspiration for creating a better dynamic array to get practice with all that stuff. Okay. So I think I'm going to do, maybe not the list union. So the list union is a method that takes 2 array lists and creates a 3rd array list that has all the different elements inside of it where there aren't duplicates. I think what I'm going to do, it's more interesting. I'm going to do the list intersection. So I'm going to write a method that takes 2 array lists and it returns a 3rd array list where the elements in the 3rd array list are in both the 1st and the 2nd array list. and I'm not going to have duplicates. Okay. Just to show you examples of okay, as a hint, don't call your example class array list here, because Java will get very, very confused. I have been burned by that before. It gives really weird errors. Okay. And I think I forgot to mention the imports. Of course, it hides them on me. Let's just do this. We'll need to import java.util.ArrayList. Apologies, I always forget about imports. Okay, so now we've created an array list. Again, it's an array list that stores strings. Let's start adding things. Hello. Goodbye. Slew. Hi, whatever. I'm not very creative today. Okay, so just copy and paste this and get a second list of things. So I'm hungry. We'll put this in the B list. I'm 202. Okay, so we'll have one array list A. It will have these 4 strings inside of it. We'll have our array list B, and it will have these 4 strings inside of it. So again, I really like array lists. They're super easy to create. You just say an array list string, B is new array list, and then the angle brackets string, and then bracket bracket. And then you can just do b.add and add strings into there, and everything's fine. So what I'm going to do is just print these out, just so it appears in the output. And make sure everything works. Okay. So you can see there's a toString method defined on array lists. If you're doing an array list of strings and you print it out, it's exactly as you expect. Let's get a third one. Intersection A and B. So what I want to do is I want to create a third array list that has all of the common words between the A list and the B list. So I'm going to call that intersection. Let's just make this public. Static. What does it return? It returns an array list string intersection array list string Of course, Java has super long names for everything, so it takes 2 parameters which are array lists of strings, and it will return something which is an array list of strings. So let's create that and write that again. It's a new array list of strings. Okay. And now we're just going to, what we're going to do, we have our two array lists, A and B. What we're going to do is we're going to loop through, let's pick A. Let's loop through A. For each word in A, we're going to check to see if it's in B. And if it's in B and it's not already in our new array list, then we're going to add it. So let's just start writing. It's less than A dot size, I++. So you can use dot size to get the length of an array list. I don't know why they can't be consistent between length and size, but that's just Java for you. If we want to get each string in there, that's how we index into an array list. If B dot contains S and not C dot contains S. So I'm checking to see if my other list has it, and if my destination list, the third list, doesn't have it, because I don't want duplicates. C.add S. Then I think I just returned C. Okay, well, let me just test this, and then I'll go back through it. So my first list had hello, goodbye, salut, hi. My second list had hello, goodbye, I'm hungry, comp 202. And so when I take the intersection, I'm taking the words that are common to both. I'll get hello, goodbye. So it does what we expect it to do. What did we do? We created a new array list of strings. We did a loop through our A array list, our first array list, I from 0 to I less than A dot size. Get each string, check to see if our second array list contains that string, and if the third array list doesn't already have it, so that we don't have duplicates, then we add it to the third array list, and then we return that. So I want to show this just to show it's a little bit annoying to have to create array list and then to keep saying that all these store strings. So it's a little bit annoying to create them, but hopefully you can see that once you have these classes, it's super easy to use. So all you have to do is just import java.util.ArrayList, and then you can use all these things. You can build array lists, get their size, index into them, see if something is contained or not, and so on. Okay. Questions about this?
So get and add are imported here, or are referred to via the other class?
You're just importing the class, and get and add are methods of array lists. So when you import the array list class, you get access to those methods. Yep?
For a project or assignment, would we have to make it ignore a case in order to compare the array lists?
That's a great question, because contains, if you read the documentation, 99.9% sure that it needs it to be the exact same case. So a great question for an assignment or the final would be to write a version that searches an array list and searches it to see if it ignores the case. I can sense that some people would like me to write that code, and that's a great example of using array lists. So let's do that. So this will do, let's get the index. So let's take an array list string, it's called AL, and we'll search it for a string S. So size, thank you. Yeah, I was about to say I really like using IDEs just because it gives you that list, and you can see, because I mean I always forget for array list and strings and arrays, it's the length, is it length, the brackets, is it size? I can never ever remember. So we'll loop through each position in the array. We'll get each string inside. Whoops. Let's call this x. If x, how can I check, equals ignore case. Okay. So if you want to check and go through in array list to see if there's a particular string, it's almost exactly the same as doing it with an array. You just have a for loop going from I is equal to 0, I less than al.size. You get each element inside that array list. Check to see if it's equal to the thing you're searching for. If so, here I'm going to return I. I'm going to excuse me. I'm going to return the index. Where did I find that element? And if I get through everything and I couldn't find it, I return -1. Okay. Questions on that? All right. So what I want to do, something a little bit silly, because you know me. I'm going to create a little program. Obviously, that's what you guys are going to do over the Easter break. You're going to create an app that's for a business that offers spa services to cats. So something like that. I mean, that's what everyone does over their Easter break, of course. And why I want to show this, A, because it's funny, and B, I want to show it because I want to have an array list of cats, and I want to show you guys how to iterate through that list and do stuff. Excuse me. Okay, so we're going to start by creating cats, and cats will have a name, and they'll have a Boolean whether they've been pampered or not. If you don't know what pampered means, pampered means that something has been treated very well. So we're just going to have a basic class cat with a name and whether they've been pampered or not. Yeah, let's just do it that. So delete that. Okay, doesn't want to do it. Okay, so we'll have our cat, and we'll have our cat spa. Okay, so inside our cat class, we said we had a name, and we have a Boolean, whether they've been treated well or not. So let's just quickly create a constructor. This.name is equal to name. And you don't need to have this because what's the default value of a Boolean? False. Don't need to have this, but I'm just going to put that there. Just it's nice and explicit. It looks nice. Okay, let's create a toString method. Again, it's this public string toString. And then I will return name plus P is for pampered, this.pampered. Okay, let's have a cat. Make a new cat. Alice. Cat B is new cat Bob. Excellent cat names. Let's just print out A just to see if everything's working okay. Okay. So now we can print out Alice and we can see whether Alice is pampered or not. And I don't think this will yeah, let's just do this. Okay, can anyone tell me how they think I might create an array list of cats? Anyone want to take a guess? Cat? Yep. Don't forget it's the class name. You don't put an S on there. So it's just cat. So cat list equals new array list stores cat. Should be on one line. That's all you need. So now we can add A. Now we can add B. And instead of just printing out A, we'll print out cat list. So we run this. Here we have an array list. It stores cats. That's all we need to do. We just say we have an array list. It stores some kind of reference type. Before we were storing strings, now we're storing cats. Here we're adding those cats to the cat list. It's okay. Java knows you're trying to add something of type cat. Okay, the list expects a cat. You're trying to add a cat. Everything is fine. And then when we print it out, it goes through and it calls the toString method on every instance inside that list. Okay, so that's the basics. Any questions about that?
Did you import the array list at the head of the cat stuff? Or how did you?
I think I might have done that automatically. Apologize for that. That's what happens when you use IDEs. Sometimes it does things for you automatically, and then you forget. So yes, if you're using ArrayList, you have to import java.util.ArrayList. Okay. I did talk about Java doing type checking. So let's do something. Let's try to add a string to our cat list. And here we have some nice type checking. So because you said that this array list stores cats, you cannot add a string in there. So Java is doing some nice little type checking for us. And that's using some complicated behind the scenes stuff that I'll briefly touch on next week. Okay. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to do something pretty simple. On each cat, I'm not even going to have a setter. We'll just have a way of saying that each cat is pampered. So treating each cat to a nice, I was going to say massage, but cats probably hate massages. And they also hate like hot tubs and stuff like that. So I don't know, however you treat a cat, well, lots of catnip. What are we going to do? Let's iterate through this list and let's pamper each cat. So again, it's this cat list.size. Get each cat. So cat list.get. Get that cat at I. And then call pamper on that cat. And then I'll print out that list again. So this is a small little basic example just to show that when you're dealing, now that we're almost at the end of the course, we only have a few more topics to talk about. Array lists are super useful. They're actually built on code that's very much like that dynamic array that I showed at the beginning of this lecture. So it's all about creating these useful classes to use in the future, about hiding details for the user so that they can easily do stuff with it. Like, to me, just being able to add something to this array list and for it to handle all the details, that's great. That saves me a lot of headache. So I just want to show in this example how easy it is to say, okay, this array list stores a certain type. We can add instances of that type to that list. When we print it out, it calls the toString method on every instance in that list. It's very easy to iterate through that list using .size and .get. Here I'm getting each cat out of that list, and then I can call, you can do whatever you want. You can access attributes. You can call methods on everything in there. It's all very nice and consistent and I think easy to use. Okay. So let me just check my notes. Let's make sure I have everything. Yeah, I do. So are there any questions about this one? About cats in an array list? Yep.
Just the thing that's been nagging at me because I did that. Earlier you were doing array list string.
Yep.
Now you're doing array list cat.
Yep.
And the distinction between the two are not quite there.
It's just whatever you put inside the angle brackets here, that's the only type that can be stored in that array list.
So if you wrote array list string,
yep,
then you could do, above there, you'd have to write string A equals new string out, for example.
Yeah, then I'm changing the types of everything. But whatever type you put inside these angle brackets, that's the only type that array list can store.
But in this case, cat is another class stored in the same
yeah.
directory. So, and then the fact that it accepts strings or whatever is already listed as an attribute in that class. So that's enough.
Let me rephrase what I'm saying. I told you how string is a reference type. And cats are reference types. There's a string class somewhere within Java. Here's the cat class. So when I'm saying that this is a type, it's a type or it's a reference type. It's just another word.
It's like int or double.
No,
but you've created it.
Okay, that's an interesting point. One I'll get to later. This will give you the error type argument cannot be a primitive type. So array lists, and I'll talk about this more later, array lists can only store reference types. They can't store primitive types. We have to do some special stuff later, which is called wrapping, but not that kind of wrapping, because I'm not going to do that. We have to use wrapping in order to put primitive types inside an array list. So you can only store reference types inside an array list. And that's just because of internal stuff that Java is doing. Okay, what I do want to show you, I have 5 minutes left. I want to show you something. Yeah, I want to show you something. I've been working on the last assignment. It's going to be out in a few days. And I want to show you something. We talked about this with the tic-tac-toe example, having a recurring loop so the user can enter input. I'm going to show you another example of that just to have that fresh in your mind. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new scanner. So we're going to go back to... not too much of the scanner stuff, but I just want to make sure it's fresh in your mind how to do user input. So you need to do java.util.scanner if you're using the scanner. Don't forget. And we're going to get some input from the user. While, excuse me, while the input is not equal to quit, we're going to have a little loop. So we'll have the user enter command. So we'll say enter a command. And input is sc dot next line. Okay. So just a quick little while loop to get input from the user. If they type quit, this loop will stop. So let's have some commands in here. Let's have some commands to mess with this list of cats. So let's do if input dot equals add. So just for now, we'll do copy and paste. Enter a name. String name is that. Enter a, nope, we don't need that, sorry. Cat C is new cat with that name. Cat list dot add that new cat. Okay, let me write this and then I will talk about it. Cat list else input. Okay. So what we're going to have is we're going to have a little loop here, a little while loop. So we have a scanner to get input from the user. We just initialize this input so I can use it in my while loop. So while my input is not equal to quit, we get the user to enter a command. We just get the next line from the user. If it's equal to add, we'll ask them to enter a name. They enter a name, and then we create a cat with that name and add them to the list. If the user types in print, we're going to print out that cat list. So again, that just prints out the array list. And then internally, it calls toString on each cat inside. And then otherwise, if I type something wrong, it just tells me that my command is not recognized. So let's start that, see what happens. So if I type in print, prints out my list of cats. Then I have add, so I enter a name. What's the name of a cat? Batman. Batman is the name of a cat. Now I have a new cat added. So is that easy to get input from the user and then to add a new cat to my list? So let's do add. I really like this name from the midterm, Mr. Cinnamon. So we added Mr. Cinnamon again to our list. So we also have the print command, which prints out the list. Let's pet all the kitties. Unfortunately, that's not recognized. We haven't made that as a command yet. But it does say command not recognized, which is nice to let the user know they've entered something not recognized, and then we can quit. It does say command not recognized quit, which is an error, but then it quits the while loop. So I show this. I show this because we're going to use something like this on the last assignment to get input from the user, and then depending on the command they want, you're going to call different methods on different things, and we're going to have a player in a game. Okay. So again, I have midterm viewing is from 3 to 5. I have office hours today, and I don't have office hours on Wednesday. Sorry? Yep, and I always forget, close your scanner when you're done with it.